It was that time of year again. The air was crisp, the streets lined with fallen leaves, and the distant hum of holiday music seemed to echo in the distance. Chris had always been a fan of Christmas lights, and every year he went above and beyond to decorate his home with the most elaborate and dazzling display on the block. His house was the go-to destination for families in the neighborhood. People from all over came to see his decorations. Twinkling lights, inflatable Santas, reindeer, snowmen, and giant candy canes lined the front yard. His display had grown over the years, and with each new holiday season, he added more lights, more decorations, and even music synchronized to the flashing lights. Chris's lights had become legendary. They weren't just decorations. They were a celebration of the season, a way for him to share his love for the holidays with his neighbors and the world. But not everyone appreciated his festive spirit. The Homeowners Association, HOA, an entity that had long been a thorn in Chris's side, seemed to have its eyes on his decorations. The moment the first lights flickered to life that December, Chris's mailbox was filled with letters of complaint, some from his neighbors, others from the HOA itself. The first letter arrived early one morning in late November. It was a formal notice from the HOA, stamped with their official logo. Chris opened the envelope with an uneasy feeling in his gut, already suspecting what it might say. "Dear Mr. Carter," the letter began, "we regret to inform you that your holiday light display has exceeded the acceptable limits outlined in our neighborhood guidelines. As a result, we kindly request that you remove your lights immediately or face possible fines and penalties. Sincerely, Margaret L. Whalen, HOA President." Chris stared at the letter in disbelief. He had been decorating his house this way for years. It was practically a tradition, and everyone loved it. Yet now the HOA was trying to restrict his right to celebrate. The last thing he wanted was to get into a legal battle, but it seemed he had no choice. Chris was furious. How could the HOA target him for something as harmless as a holiday display? He had always maintained a respectful relationship with his neighbors and ensured that his lights were never too loud or disruptive. But this time, the HOA seemed determined to tear down his holiday spirit. The following week, another letter arrived, but this one was even more threatening. "Dear Mr. Carter, we have received numerous complaints about the excessive brightness and disruption caused by your holiday light display. It has come to our attention that your decorations are significantly outside the parameters of the neighborhood's established rules. If these decorations are not taken down within 7 days, we will issue a fine of $500 per day until compliance is achieved. Please consider this a final warning. Sincerely, Margaret L. Whalen, HOA President." Chris's blood boiled. $500 a day? For what? For spreading holiday cheer? He took a deep breath, then grabbed his phone and called a friend. His friend, Nate, was a lawyer who had worked on cases involving property rights before. After explaining the situation, Nate told him that the HOA had very limited power when it came to personal decorations, especially when those decorations didn't impact the health, safety, or welfare of the community. But it wasn't about just winning the argument. Chris had no intention of backing down without a fight. The HOA had overstepped its bounds, and he wasn't going to let them bully him into removing his lights. Chris's decision to stand firm spread quickly through the neighborhood. Some of the neighbors were on his side, supportive of his right to decorate as he saw fit. Others, however, were more conservative and sided with the HOA. It was a divide Chris had never expected. He had always thought of the neighborhood as a close-knit community. One evening, he hosted a small gathering of neighbors at his house to discuss the situation. He wanted to understand where everyone stood, and maybe even get support from those who hadn't spoken up yet. To his surprise, many of the people who had initially remained silent spoke out, expressing their own concerns about the overreach of the HOA. A few neighbors had been warned for minor infractions, like leaving their trash bins out a little too long or painting their fences without HOA approval. They all agreed that the HOA's zealous enforcement was out of control, and Chris was just the latest victim in a long list of unreasonable demands. Chris could feel a surge of support building, and it gave him the strength to keep pushing forward. By the time December rolled around, Chris had decided that enough was enough. He would not remove his lights, and he wouldn't be bullied by an overbearing HOA. He took to social media, sharing the letters and his story with the world. His post went viral almost immediately. The next day, a local news station reached out to him for an interview, and soon his holiday display was the talk of the town. People from neighboring communities came to see his protest lights, and Chris's lawn became filled with visitors taking photos, laughing, and celebrating. The HOA, on the other hand, was getting increasingly frustrated. Margaret sent another cease and desist letter, demanding that Chris take down his lights before the holidays were even over. That's when Chris decided to make a statement. He expanded his display, adding even more lights and decorations, giant inflatables of Santa and reindeer, flashing multicolored lights, and a giant snow globe that lit up the entire front yard. He also posted a message on social media. The HOA can't take my holiday cheer. This is my home, and these lights are here to stay. Hashtag light up the HOA. As the situation escalated, the HOA found themselves facing a growing public backlash. Chris's supporters included not only his neighbors, but also people from all over the city who were fed up with restrictive HOA rules. On Christmas Eve, an even larger crowd gathered in front of Chris's house. Cars lined the streets, with people getting out to take pictures, singing Christmas carols and joining in the festive atmosphere. Chris's display became an icon of defiance. People shared online, and soon, national news outlets were covering the story. The HOA found themselves at the center of a media storm, as critics called their actions petty and unnecessary. Behind the scenes, Margaret's position as president of the HOA became more and more untenable. She faced calls for her resignation, as well as pressure from fellow board members who were starting to feel the heat. The HOA had no idea that a simple act of joyful defiance would turn into a national controversy. Chris's legal team prepared to fight the HOA in court. They filed a lawsuit against the association, claiming that the HOA had violated his freedom of expression and First Amendment rights. Chris argued that his holiday lights were no different than any other form of artistic expression, and the HOA had no legal right to shut him down. The case garnered significant media attention as the court date neared. People from around the country began showing their support for Chris's cause. Some even sent donations to help cover his legal fees. The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. Chris's lawyer, Nate, made a compelling argument, stating that the HOA had no authority to interfere with Chris's freedom of expression. He also pointed out that the lights were not causing any disruption to traffic, were not overly loud, and were enjoyed by the community. The HOA's defense was weak. Margaret and the other board members were forced to admit that they had never previously enforced such strict restrictions on personal decorations. The judge seemed to question the HOA's reasoning, and it was clear that Chris's case had gained sympathy from the public. After a long and heated trial, the judge ruled in Chris's favor, declaring that the HOA's actions were unconstitutional. The judge ordered the HOA to pay Chris's legal fees and issued a public apology. Chris's holiday lights were declared protected, and the HOA was prohibited from interfering with similar displays in the future. The news of the victory spread like wildfire. Chris's neighborhood celebrated with a massive holiday party, complete with food, music, and, of course, the dazzling lights. The community had come together in support of Chris's right to decorate as he pleased, and it was a victory that went beyond just the lights. In the aftermath of the trial, the HOA was forced to restructure its policies. Margaret resigned from her position as president, and several other board members were replaced. The new HOA leadership promised to take a more lenient approach, allowing homeowners more freedom to express themselves during the holidays. Chris continued to decorate his house every year, but now his displays had a new meaning. They weren't just about celebrating Christmas. They were about fighting for individual rights and standing up to oppressive rules. Chris became a local hero and even started speaking at community events, encouraging others to stand up for their rights. The story of Chris's victory against the HOA became a legend in the neighborhood. People looked forward to his light displays every year, knowing they symbolized something much bigger than just holiday cheer. It was a story of resilience, unity, and the power of standing up to injustice. The holiday season, once a time of stress and conflict, was now a time of celebration for the entire community. Chris's victory against the HOA didn't just change his neighborhood. It sparked a nationwide movement. People all across the country began challenging restrictive HOA rules that had previously seemed unquestionable. There were marches, petitions, and social media campaigns pushing back against the overreach of these associations. Chris found himself invited to speak at events, not just about holiday decorations, but about standing up for personal freedom and fighting for community rights. His story became a symbol of resistance against authority figures who try to dictate the small details of people's lives. The news outlets that had once covered the HOA side now celebrated Chris's victory. Talk shows, interviews, and podcasts asked him to share his journey, turning him into an inspirational figure. He had become the face of the fight against bureaucratic overreach, and his message was clear. No one should have the power to dictate how you express joy and community. As Chris became a symbol of resistance, other neighborhoods started challenging their HOAs as well. The pressure mounted, and soon, HOA associations across the country found themselves facing scrutiny and legal challenges. Many associations had to reconsider their strict rules about everything from holiday decorations to lawn care. Margaret Whalen, who had previously been the iron fist of the HOA, was the subject of countless jokes. The community that once feared her now mocked her. People would make playful references to Margaret's Christmas ban whenever they saw a grand holiday light display. Eventually, she was publicly humiliated and forced to step down. The former president's role as the antagonist of Chris's story became a cautionary tale for others who sought to micromanage personal freedoms. The HOA's board found themselves pressured to change their ways. With Chris's legal victory in the rearview mirror, they began to loosen their grip on property rights. No longer could they simply issue fines for things like a few extra lights on a house. They were now under constant scrutiny by the public and the media. Chris didn't stop there. Inspired by the movement he had helped spark, he established a foundation to fight for homeowners' rights. The foundation's mission was simple: to provide legal resources, information, and support for individuals who felt oppressed by their HOAs or local governing bodies. The foundation grew quickly, providing free legal advice and fighting for changes in zoning laws, noise ordinances, and decoration guidelines. Over the next few years, Chris's organization secured victories for homeowners across the country. People who've been victimized by unreasonable HOA rules found that they had a strong ally in Chris and his foundation. The foundation's success became Chris's true legacy, one built on helping others. As the years passed, Chris's holiday display grew even more spectacular. What began as a small act of defiance had now turned into an annual event that attracted visitors from all over the country. What had once been a symbol of rebellion was now a celebration of freedom. His neighborhood's holiday lights became so popular that they were officially recognized as a landmark event. The local government even set up a holiday market near his home, turning it into a festive hub that brought business to the entire town. Chris had no idea when he put up those lights that he was starting a tradition that would continue for generations. The spirit of his rebellion was now embedded in the culture of the town. It was no longer just about lights. It was about honoring the freedom to express yourself and stand against systems that sought to limit those freedoms. In the years following Chris's victory, HOA rules began to change across the nation. Some HOAs began to introduce more flexible guidelines, allowing for more personal expression and less intrusive oversight. Many neighborhoods even started incorporating community discussions before making new policies, ensuring that the voices of the people were heard. Meanwhile, Chris's legal foundation continued to grow, expanding its reach to communities that had never before considered standing up to their HOA. The foundation provided a support network, helping homeowners who had been fined or threatened by their associations. It wasn't just about defending holiday lights anymore. It was about standing up for fairness in every corner of the homeownership experience. Years later, Chris stood outside his home, looking at the massive light display that he had spent weeks preparing. The lights twinkled in the night, each one a symbol of resilience, freedom, and community. People from all walks of life stood on the sidewalk, admiring the display. Children danced in the street, while adults shared hot cocoa. But it wasn't just his neighborhood celebrating. Chris had changed the world. He smiled, knowing that what had started as a small act of defiance against an HOA had become a movement, a cultural shift, and a symbol of freedom for homeowners everywhere. As he looked over the display, Chris realized that he had done more than just keep his lights up. He had sparked a revolution of self-expression, and for that, he would always be remembered. Even after Chris retired and moved on to other endeavors, The holiday lights continued to shine each year. The display had become legendary, and the people who had joined in his fight kept the tradition alive. New families moved in, and the neighborhood had become a vibrant example of how a community could grow stronger together when they stood up to the powers that sought to oppress them. Chris's legacy lived on in every twinkling light, every joyful carol sung, and every person who walked down the streets, knowing that their freedom to express themselves would always be protected. The HOA, once a symbol of control and oppression, was now a distant memory. The future was bright. It was a future where people could decorate as they wished, celebrate as they wished, and live as they wished, free from the overreach of those who thought they had the right to dictate their lives. Chris had won, not just for himself, but for everyone. As the years passed, Chris's story and his victory against the HOA became part of the fabric of the neighborhood. New families moved in, and they were quickly introduced to the tradition of the holiday lights, an annual display that not only brought the community together, but also became a symbol of resistance against unnecessary rules. For many of these new homeowners, the lights were more than just a pretty decoration. They were a reminder of how far the community had come. The spirit of freedom, defiance, and unity that had started with Chris's holiday lights continued to influence the newer generations. Local schools even incorporated the story into their curriculum, teaching students about individual rights, community involvement, and the importance of standing up to unjust authority. Chris was invited to speak at school events, sharing his story with young students who were inspired by his actions. The movement that had begun with one man's defiant Christmas lights had turned into something larger, inspiring people to think differently about their rights as homeowners and as members of community. The annual holiday celebration in the neighborhood had become so well known that it attracted tourists from far and wide. Small businesses began to thrive, setting up booths during the festivities to sell hot chocolate, crafts, and holiday-themed treats. It wasn't just a light display anymore. It was an event, a festival, and a time for the community to come together, celebrate, and reflect on the power of standing up for one's rights. Chris's children, who had grown up with the tradition of decorating the house each holiday season, eventually took over the responsibility of organizing the light display. They added their own personal touches while keeping the spirit of rebellion alive. The lights had been passed down as a legacy, and now it wasn't just about keeping the tradition, but about honoring the fight that made it all possible. One year, as the lights went up and the neighborhood began to fill with families and visitors, Chris stood back and marveled at the display. It wasn't just a beautiful sight. It was a culmination of a journey that had begun with a small act of defiance. He had been a pioneer, challenging the idea that an HOA could dictate the smallest details of people's lives. But what had started as an argument over a few $100s in fines had become a cultural shift. He had lit the way for people to feel empowered, to fight for what they believed in, and to know that even the most oppressive forces could be challenged. As Chris watched families strolling through his yard, admiring the lights and snapping pictures, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The battle he had fought with the HOA had been tough, but it had brought him closer to his community. It had shown him that standing up for what's right wasn't just about winning in court. It was about bringing people together. Chris had started the tradition, but the community spirit had grown beyond his wildest dreams. Neighbors, once divided by differences in opinion about the HOA, had united over something much more powerful, a shared belief in freedom and the right to express joy and creativity. The lights had become a beacon for a stronger, more unified community. Despite all the progress, the HOA had not completely given up on its fight. A few of the more hardline members continued to resist the new atmosphere in the neighborhood. They were still upset by the media backlash in Chris's victory, and they felt that the HOA should reassert its authority. In a final desperate attempt to regain control, the HOA sent out a new notice, once again threatening to fine homeowners for excessive holiday decorations. This time, however, the reaction from the community was different. People were no longer afraid. The days of the HOA dictating personal freedoms were over. The response from the neighborhood was immediate and overwhelming. People gathered at a town hall meeting, voicing their concerns and demanding that the HOA cease their attempts to restrict personal expression. Chris, now a respected figure in the community, stood at the front of the meeting and spoke passionately about the importance of preserving individual rights. "We have fought for years to make this neighborhood a place of freedom," Chris said. This isn't just about holiday lights. This is about our right to live our lives without being constantly policed. If we let the HOA step in again, we risk losing everything we've built together. It's time to make sure our voices are heard. The message was clear. The community was done being controlled. This time, the HOA faced a united front. Their power had been eroded, and they were no longer the dominant force in the neighborhood. The people had won. Years passed, and the neighborhood became a shining example of what could happen when a community came together to fight for its rights. Chris continued to decorate his house each year, and his display remained a symbol of resilience, joy, and freedom. The HOA, though still present, had been forced to adapt. They no longer issued fines or attempted to dictate personal decoration choices. Instead, the association focused on matters of safety and community well-being, but only when necessary. The HOA learned that there was a balance between enforcing rules and respecting individual freedoms. The once divisive power struggle between Chris and the HOA became a cautionary tale, and over time, the story of Chris's victory was passed down to the generations. It wasn't just about holiday lights anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, protecting individual rights, and creating a community where everyone could be their true selves. Chris's legacy lived on as the community flourished. He watched as new families moved in, the next generation of children running past his house, their laughter echoing in the air. He saw the lights shining as brightly as ever, a beacon of all that they had fought for and all that they had achieved. The fight with the HOA had become a distant memory, replaced by the joy and unity that Chris had helped create. As the neighborhood continued to grow and thrive, it stood as a testament to the power of standing up for freedom, community, and the right to celebrate life on your own terms. And so, every December, when the lights went up and the streets were filled with people celebrating, Chris knew that his fight had been worth it. The HOA had tried to ban his lights, but they had unwittingly ignited a movement that would forever change the way people looked at their homes, their communities, and their rights. The lights would never go out, not in Chris's neighborhood, and certainly not in the hearts of those who had fought for their freedom. As the years went by, Chris's fight against the HOA's overreach became part of local legend. But even with the HOA's gradual shift toward more reasonable policies, there were still rumblings beneath the surface. One crisp winter evening, just before the start of the holiday season, Chris was in the middle of prepping his house for another year of extravagant lights. He could hear the soft hum of the strings of lights as they powered up. But suddenly, there was an unexpected knock on the door. When Chris opened the door, he was stunned to find two individuals in suits standing before him, holding clipboards. They introduced themselves as representatives from a large media company, interested in documenting the HOA lights case for a nationwide special. They wanted to interview Chris and highlight his story as part of a broader piece about community empowerment and the fight for personal freedoms. For a moment, Chris hesitated. He had already shared his story countless times, but this time felt different. The media was beginning to pick up on stories like his. What had started as a small battle in his neighborhood was now becoming a symbol of something bigger, the rising power of grassroots resistance. After a moment's pause, Chris agreed to the interview, knowing this would give him the opportunity to share his message with a wider audience. The special aired on major networks during the holiday season, and Chris became a household name. The segment not only detailed his fight against the HOA, but also explored the growing resistance against overregulation in communities across the country. What started as a fight over Christmas lights had evolved into a larger conversation about the rights of homeowners and the influence of homeowner associations. News outlets from local stations to national channels picked up the story, and soon after, Chris found himself invited to participate in panels and discussions about property rights, freedom of expression, and government oversight. The message that resonated most with people was clear. If we don't stand up for our rights, no one else will. As Chris traveled the country, speaking at various events, he found himself more committed than ever to ensuring that future generations of homeowners would never face the same restrictions that he had. His foundation grew to become an influential advocate for homeowners everywhere, helping people to take back control of their property and voice their concerns. By the time the next holiday season rolled around, the story of Chris's lights had sparked an unexpected trend. People in neighborhoods all across the country began decorating their homes in grand fashion. not just as a celebration of the holidays, but as a declaration of independence from HOA rules that stifled their creativity. A movement had started, and it was clear that the tradition of over-the-top holiday lights was spreading far beyond Chris's neighborhood. Families across the country were sharing their stories on social media, posting pictures of their homes lit up with bright colors, and some even referenced Chris's own fight with the HOA in their posts. The hashtag lighting up the fight began trending, and for the first time in a long while, people were standing up together, saying, "We are free to express ourselves however we wish." Some homeowners even reached out to Chris personally, thanking him for his courage and inspiring them to fight against restrictions in their own neighborhoods. His story, and the victory that followed, had given them the courage to push back against the forces that sought to control their expressions of joy and community spirit. Chris's foundation, now well established and highly respected, helped advocate for changes to HOA policies nationwide. With thousands of new members, Chris's movement was unstoppable. The foundation organized town hall meetings, workshops, and legal seminars, providing homeowners with the tools they needed to challenge unfair policies and become empowered advocates for their own rights. Local governments began to recognize the power of grassroots movements, and many started considering regulation changes that reflected the values of their communities rather than the whims of an unaccountable HOA board. Chris became part of a national conversation about property rights, and his victory served as a foundation for a larger push for legislative reform. Years later, Chris looked at the vast network of neighborhoods that had embraced the idea of personal freedom and community pride. The battle he had fought so many years ago seemed like a distant memory, but its impact was still deeply felt. New homeowners no longer feared an HOA's dictatorial rules. They now had the knowledge and confidence to fight back and make their voices heard. On Christmas Eve, Chris once again stood in front of his house, admiring the sparkling lights as they lit up the night. His family had gathered around, as they always did, to take in the beauty of the display. His kids now helped with the setup, ensuring that the tradition continued for generations to come. What had started as a single act of defiance against an overbearing HOA had become a movement of change, one that had touched the lives of millions of people. Chris had not only fought for his right to celebrate the holidays in his own way, he had fought for freedom of every homeowner to express themselves without fear of judgment or punishment. As the holiday lights twinkled in the cold winter air, Chris realized that the battle was no longer just about holiday decorations. It had become a symbol of something much greater: the power of community, the importance of personal expression, and the fight for freedom against any force that sought to suppress it. The neighborhood was full of life and laughter. Children ran around, their faces glowing with excitement as they took in the beauty of the lights. Chris's lights, now seen as a beacon of freedom, continued to inspire others to push back against oppressive rules. And it wasn't just about the lights anymore. It was about honoring the spirit of freedom and the rights of individuals to live life on their own terms. As Chris looked out over the glowing neighborhood, he knew that his fight had been worth it. He had sparked a movement that would live on, passed down from one generation to the next. The spirit of resilience, the power of standing up for what's right, and the importance of community would never be forgotten. The lights would always shine bright, reminding everyone of the freedom they had fought for and the joy that had come from standing together as a united community. Chris's legacy continued to grow long after he had passed. The neighborhood, now a symbol of resistance and joy, had become a national landmark. People came from all over to see the lights, not just for the beauty, but to remember the story of how they came to be, a story of courage, unity, and triumph over adversity. The movement Chris had started had spread across the nation, and it showed no signs of stopping. Each holiday season, his family would continue the tradition, knowing that the lights were not just about holiday cheer, but about preserving the freedom that Chris had fought so hard to protect. Chris had shown the world that no matter how big the obstacle, no matter how powerful the opposition, one person with conviction could change the world. And every year, as the lights twinkled and the streets filled with people, Chris's spirit of defiance and joy lived on, forever illuminating the path to a brighter, freer future. As the years passed, Chris's holiday lights became more than just a tradition. They symbolized freedom, resilience, and the power of community unity. What had started as a personal battle against an overbearing HOA had sparked a nationwide movement. Chris's story was now ingrained in the fabric of communities all over the country, inspiring homeowners to take back control of their property rights. Even with the HOA's failed attempt to intervene, the neighborhood had flourished. No longer dominated by restrictions, residents were free to express themselves however they wished. Chris, now an influential advocate for homeowners, continued to be a beacon of hope for those fighting for their rights. Chris's lights remained an annual spectacle, and each year, more people gathered to celebrate, not just the holidays, but the victory that had come with it. The once controversial lights were now a symbol of courage, and every neighborhood that took part in the movement stood as proof of the power of standing up for one's rights. Chris's children had grown up alongside the tradition, and, when the time came, took over the mantle, ensuring that the story continued. It wasn't just about the lights. It was about creating a community that would never be silenced again. Chris had succeeded in more than just winning against the HOA. He had sparked a change that echoed across the country, empowering individuals to reclaim their homes and live life on their own terms. The holiday lights, still shining brightly every year, remained a reminder of the power of standing up for what's right, and that one person with enough heart can change the world.